So, hello and welcome to the Watson Farley Watch This Space interview series with me, your host, Randeep Bubra, a partner in the aerospace team here at Watson Farley. In today's episode, we'll be discussing a number of interesting topics with our guest, who I'm delighted to welcome, Jan Grøndrup from Kratos. This series is part of a video series that we're doing across space generally. And for those that don't know, Watson Farley Williams is a global law firm, and is one of the leading firms in the space sector. And I personally have been involved with almost all of the satellite constellations that have come to market and been financed across the last 10 years. So that's a brief introduction, I think, of Watson Farley Williams and of myself. Jan, delighted to have you, and hand over
Thank
to
you.
you to introduce yourself and Kratos.
Well, thank you for having me. I've been in the space business almost all of my career. I've been with Kratos for the last 9 years. We are doing all of the ground infrastructure, so everything in satellite that goes on the ground. We don't do any satellites and we don't do any launches, but pretty much everything else that goes on the ground. And my role has been various commercial roles with Kratos, and the last couple of years I've been working more on the business development side, where we are looking at developing customer finance solutions, because as we can see that the projects are becoming bigger and bigger, there's also a need to bring finance to the table.
Perfect. And I think it's always interesting when you talk to people in the space market as to, before we get into sort of the heart of our discussion today, as to what drove them to work in the space industry. So what was it for you, Jan?
Well, I'm actually old enough to remember the Apollo 9 moon landing, and I remember seeing it on television with my grandparents on a black and white television at the time, and then naively as I was, I'm from Denmark originally. When I think I was 10 to 12 years, I wrote on an old-fashioned typewriter, manual typewriter. I wrote to NASA, I want to become an astronaut. and and actually at the time they wrote me back a very nice letter saying, you know what, keep up your good schoolwork, do math and sciences. And they sent me a lot of nice pictures and of the astronauts and the rockets. And then later on, early in my career, mainly by coincidence, I was offered a job in satellite communication with a manufacturer of satellite terminals. And out of my, I guess, my childhood dream, I said, okay, it sort of, it smells a little of the right thing here. So I joined, and I never looked back.
That's amazing. Not very many people, I think, can say that they managed to get into the industry that they dream of as a child. So that's a great story to kick off. I think if we look at the satellite market as a whole, it'll be interesting, I think, to get your take and perhaps your customers' take on how you see that. And I know that's such a broad question, but across the sort of sectors that you see.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen huge changes, both in terms of who is in the market, but also in terms of technology. There's a lot of changes on technology in terms of finally things are digitizing, finally things are virtualizing, things that drives the need for orchestration. This is what Kratos does. So we will position in that area. But I also think that there's another thing that's happening, which is really interesting, which is that satellite is now becoming part of 3G, the 3GPP standard, which is a standard driving mobile networks or terrestrial networks. And I think that's super interesting, because satellite has always been niche and has always been hard and has always been, oh, they are the boys and girls over in the corner that we have to play with, but we prefer not to. Now it's no longer, it's just becoming part of the mainstream telecom. And I think that's super interesting. So there's a software, so the ground is being virtualized and the satellites are being virtualized. So the whole thing is becoming much more like a terrestrial telecom network, just happening in space. And I think there's also lots of new players because of this, that we see coming in on all levels in the value chain. I think that's super interesting. And what this, of course, does is that it also brings more capital. So the capital markets, both debt and equity, are starting to look at space and satellite not as something exotic, but really something that they have to be part of, and having a serious look at this. And that's a relatively new thing, that the financial community is starting to look more on this. And that, of course, also drive capital and funding towards the industry, which is all good. And the last thing, which I think will have a major impact, is direct to device. It's been a dream, ever since I started in the industry, that you could have a direct to device, satellite phone, and now that's becoming reality.
Yeah, I mean, and that's amazing. I mean, I think that picks up quite neatly on a lot of the things that we're going to discuss today, but also the kind of expectations of the industry, right? Because we've heard for a long time this is a huge growth industry. It's grown huge. There's lots and lots of potential, but I think there are also challenges, right? And I mean, I think financing is definitely one of them. The kit around space is always very cost sensitive and expensive. But are there any other challenges you see in the sort of space market in the short to medium term?
For sure. I mean, as bullish as I am about the space market, there's also a lot of challenges, because there in when everything starts to change, there will be winners and losers, and that's also the case in the space industry. You can say a lot of the operators or the actors in the space industry have been in a protected market. It was very supply demand driven, which was somewhat balanced, and that meant that you could plan a satellite. You already had your customers, you had long-term contracts, and those days are gone. So as I said, there will be winners and losers. I think one of the things that I think is maybe an overlooked strength of some of the companies that will do well is their speed of execution. Things that in the industry it was okay to take, say, 3 years to do things. If you want to, the real winners in this industry now is companies and people who are able to do it in 3 months.
Hmm.
I think that's the speed of execution is really something that is going to be a main factor of who will come out as winners and who will not. I think there's also another big thing that is now being enabled, which is what I call the share of wallet of the customers. If you take the mobile phone industry, the NMOs, the mobile network operators, they are providing more and more bandwidth essentially for the same price. But if you look at the amount of revenue that goes through your mobile phone, through your other services, through applications, that keeps increasing. But the mobile network operators haven't been able to capture a larger share of wallet. And I think that is going to be a real challenge, but also an opportunity for the satellite operators and the satellite industry in general to think about how they can capture that. And I mean, just as a hint, make sure you have flexible satellites, make sure you have flexible ground infrastructure, because these are actually underlying enabled technologies that will help you to think about and capture that bigger share of wallet.
Yeah. Well, I think that segues nicely into what we were going to discuss, ground infrastructure, and that's obviously the heart of what Kratos does. There's been a big push, I think, in the market, particularly on the broadband side, on the LEO side, LEO connectivity, huge constellations kind of going up and also in the pipeline. How do you see that impacting on the ground station side?
Well, I mean, ground is now an integral part of the network. So so as is satellites. So you cannot really have one without the other. Previously, you could build your satellites and then ground stations were built afterwards. It was not an afterthought, but it was different part of the value chain that took care of this. Now it's an integrated part of the network. So of course, this is good for people, for us on the ground, and that's also why our projects are becoming bigger, and hence the need for financing, and just the plain fact that LEO satellites are closer to the Earth means that you need more ground infrastructure, both from a technical point of view, but also from a regulatory point of view.
And I suppose one of the other aspects around not just LEO, but actually in this sort of changing world that we have, it has been around cybersecurity and around particularly that, these satellite networks. And as you say, the ground infrastructure is a core part of those. Are you seeing your customers more focused and looking at the tech around this to kind of protect on the cybersecurity perspective?
Yes, and that is driven, what we've talked a lot about already is that it's becoming an integral part of terrestrial telecom. And when that happens, of course, we become more vulnerable. It becomes, satellite is no longer something special where you need special equipment to access. You will be able to access it fairly anywhere you are with a lower technical threshold. So yes, cybersecurity is definitely something that is going up the agenda, and again, that also that's also an opportunity for differentiation.
Perfect. I think one of the other aspects that we sort of briefly mentioned, and I think that Kratos is focused on, is sort of financing solutions for your customers. And obviously we see here at Watson Farley on the financing side a lot in the space market. And there are challenges within that market that I think we've briefly mentioned. But do you want to touch on those financing pressures that for example, your customers are probably seeing? Because, the reality of the space market is you do have high capex requirements, and you do have to renew this tech as well.
Yes, yes, and there's a significant change also there. Traditionally, satellites were built with a fixed coverage, and that meant that you could go out to your customers and say, if I build a satellite with this coverage, will you then give me a contract? And you could get long-term contracts. Based on those long-term contracts, you could go out and you could finance your project. Now, as the satellites, and it's a good thing that the satellites are becoming much more flexible, software defined with beams and frequencies that can change. You no longer have a need for that. Also, that is paired with there's a lot more supply in terms of bandwidth. So you can no longer go out in the same way, in the traditional way, and say, here's my contracts, give me project financing based on this. So there's a new paradigm in terms of how these things are financed. But I also think that leads to a bigger sophistication where you need to think about what is nice to have in-house and what is needed to have, and think about really what is your core business here. And the things that are not core, maybe you can outsource this, maybe you can put this into different structures, which essentially, again, we are maybe 20 years later learning from the telecom, the terrestrial telco industry that started to outsource their cable, sorry, not their cable infrastructure, their radio infrastructure. So you have these tower companies that were established and had the sole purpose of providing radio infrastructure for the mobile network operators. I think we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing the same thing in the satellite business, that the ground infrastructure could maybe be outsourced. We're seeing much more as things becomes virtualized and put into the cloud, that it becomes as a service. These businesses have a faster time to market, so they're probably more financeable, and they're probably also, that also means that if you go into infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, you move into the financing world where venture financing is possibly open up to you. So yes, challenges, because we need to think it's not just capex and project financing. It's much more. It's a much broader palette of financing options, and you need to think really well about what kind of financing is right for my project. But at the same time, that also means that we've seen a lot more interested financing parties coming to the game and saying, hey, we're interested in looking into this, both on the debt side, on the venture side, and also on the project financing side, and on the equity side.
Yeah, it's interesting everything you say there, Jan, and I think we wholeheartedly agree, and we see very much the same things. I mean, one of the big things that everyone always sort of asks traditionally is, well, these satellites are up there in space. How easy is it to repossess a satellite? We kind of
Yeah,
get the shipping space, we get aviation. You can go and get your asset
yeah,
back. It's tangible, it's there. But actually repossessing a satellite is very easy.
yes,
And when you look now at these new satellites that have multiple uses, multiple sources
yes,
that they can do, they're not as specialized and they're easier to repurpose. So
yes,
it is opening up new opportunities, I think, to people in the market, to entrants, to kind of those non-traditional project finance, ECA, kind of commercial bank players that they're there to give financing on both, I think, equity and debt as well.
yes. And we're seeing leasing companies coming in now, and I mean, they need to get their head around the repositioning of it. But as you say, it's definitely becoming it's definitely because of the technology, repossessing and repositioning a satellite it can make a lot of sense.
Exactly. And with the benefit of kind of new tech as well, the fuel burn and the onboard fuel that is needed, depending on how you're making the maneuvers and where you're repositioning, isn't as much either. So it is very much a trodden path. I suppose just touching on some of the other things that you mentioned right back at the start, actually, one of the huge drivers, I think, at the minute that a lot of people expect to change the industry is direct to device. And I think maybe for our listeners, you could just sort of explain how direct to device works as a concept, because I think it is one of those things that maybe not everyone is fully aware of the what it's going to actually do.
Yes. Well, as science fiction as it might sound, direct to device means that you actually go directly from the satellite to a normal, unmodified mobile phone. So when you're no longer in the normal coverage areas of your terrestrial network, the mobile phone roams to the satellite, and it's seamless to the user. So the user will be part of his subscription, or maybe there's a special subscription. When there's no longer terrestrial coverage, he will roam onto the satellite. That's as simple as it is, and that's being made possible by falling launch costs, which makes it possible to launch the constellations of LEO satellites, so low Earth orbit satellites that are needed. Of course, you need quite a lot of satellites to do this, and also the technology on the satellite in terms of the power they can transmit with and receive with. So really, it is your mobile phone working all over the planet.
I mean, that just truly sounds science fiction. It sounds amazing that you can be at the top of a mountain, or on the most rural hike and effectively still have coverage. I think would appeal to a lot of customers, and I think we are seeing a lot of those big name companies that have this tech or are trying to launch this tech, and there's a lot of growth opportunities for them, but there's also the market, I think, sees them very positively. How do you see the market's reaction to this kind of development on your side? I mean, is it truly as groundbreaking, I think, as some people sort of paint it to be?
Yes, is the short answer. And I think I mean, all of these are talking about broadband to smartphones in the middle of nowhere. I think that's still some way away. But just imagine that you have text and voice anywhere, and just imagine you can have that for $1 a month. You wouldn't even notice it in your subscription. It would be part of it. If you're in rural parts of Africa where ARPUs are less than $10, using $1 to get voice and text would be a huge difference. I mean, a huge difference in terms of quality of life. And this is not about the social aspects of it. It's about the business. It's about saving time instead of having to walk to places, being able to call up to a health clinic, being able to ask, have my package been delivered? Or if I go there, what time is the bus? All of these things which we take for granted. And there are many people who are in these situations, and they're willing to pay $1 for this. And if you make the math, very quickly on the back of an envelope, 8 billion people, 12 months, we are $100 billion dollars of service revenues just for text and voice. Then we can, that is enough revenue in the industry to make these more advanced things in terms of moving it into broadband. And the broadband things on these direct to devices will also come, and I think it will come rather quickly, because I think there'll be so much funding going into this. I think this is a really interesting thing.
It all sounds hugely positive. I mean, I think we've touched on some of the challenges that the space market, has in the short term, and I think those financing pressures are sort of almost always going to be there. But the future does look so positive. So I suppose turning to that forward-looking glance, how do you see the market in the next sort of 5 years?
Lots of change. Digitalization, as I said, finally, more focus on delivering services, constellations. We haven't talked so much about it, but a lot more focus on defense. I think many more countries will want to have sovereign capabilities, and they will also have the possibilities, because you can have smaller satellites that are more flexible. D2D will take off, and I think governments will be supporting this both for sovereign needs and also for business needs. And then there's this continued interest from the financial environment that because of this is becoming part of the terrestrial, and because it is a big opportunity, we'll see that terrestrial market will attract capital, but will also to attract more sophisticated instruments into the satellite industry. And I think all of this provides the dynamism that is really needed. So yes, it's challenging because there will be lots of change, but I think the change will be for the good.
Yeah, and I think that's the excitement when you look at the government projects like Iris². You look at what Starlink and SpaceX are doing. You're right. I think the industry is changing so quickly, and I don't think that pace is only going to accelerate and continue. It's not going to slow down. So watch this space, I suppose, over the next 5 years. I just turning finally, I think, to some of the more light-hearted side of things. I guess one of those obvious questions that you have as a kid is, if you could explore sort of the ocean or space. It's one of those classic party questions, isn't it? Which one would you choose, Jan, and why?
Well, I would choose the ocean because I think you could learn so much from this that could be used into exploring space.
That's perfect. I think that's the answer I think I would have gone for as well. And I suppose finally, can you give us your best space joke?
Well, I couldn't. So I cheated. So I went on one of these IA platforms, and I said, give me a space joke. And it says to me, why did the astronaut leave his partner? And it says, because he needed space.
There you go. One of the benefits of technology and AI.
Yeah, but I guess AI still needs. I think one of the fall downs of AI is that the humorous side is still something they're not really grasping.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look, thank you, Jan, and this has been it's been a true delight and a pleasure to have you on the podcast. We're going to be doing a whole series of these videos, and hopefully, it's been interesting to the listeners. We've been talking about direct to device. We've spoken about some of the financing challenges, but I think overall, that sentiment and that bullish nature of the space market changing, but for the better, and that continued growth is one that kind of comes through in the excitement. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for listening. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of this series.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much.